Welcome to the deep dive. We're tackling a really fascinating, but also quite challenging subject today, based on the material you sent over.
Yeah, we're looking at Bahariasaurus,
Yeah.
a giant theropod from late Cretaceous North Africa.
Exactly, around 95 million years ago. But the challenge, as you pointed out, is pretty significant.
It really is. The original fossils, the ones discovered back in Egypt by Ernst Stromer's team, they were destroyed, lost in a bombing raid during World War II.
Such a tragedy. So our whole understanding, everything we're going to talk about, it's pieced together from, well, Stromer's original illustrations, his descriptions, and then later research trying to make sense of it all.
That's the core of it. We have drawings and notes, but not the bones themselves. It leaves a lot of room for interpretation and debate.
So our mission for this deep dive is to unpack that. We'll look at the discovery, the loss, and then get it into the science, its size, how it's classified, its place in that amazing ecosystem, all based on the info we have.
Sounds good. It's a story worth telling, even with the missing pieces.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The Bahariya Formation in Egypt, that's where it all kicked off.
Yeah. Richard Markgraf, working for Ernst Stromer, made the first finds in early April 1914, and then more came to light in 1922. He was out there collecting for Stromer.
But getting those fossils back to Germany wasn't straightforward, was it?
No, not at all. Because of, well, political tensions and the whole situation around World War I, the fossils didn't actually reach Stromer in Munich until 1922.
Wow, quite a delay.
Yeah, and then Stromer had the huge task of studying and describing them. His big publication finally came out in 1934.
And that 1934 paper is just crucial, isn't it? Because it's pretty much all we have from the original find.
Absolutely pivotal. It contains the detailed descriptions, the illustrations. It is the primary record.
He designated syntypes in that paper, right? The sort of official name-bearing specimen.
Exactly. So one set, IPHG 1922X47, included things like a dorsal rib bit, 3 sacral vertebrae, those are from the hip area, the pubic bones, and part of an ischium. And then another set, IPHG 1922X48, had a neck vertebra, a couple more dorsals from the back, and another pubis. These are the specific bones the name Bahariasaurus is formally tied to.
And it's those specific bones, documented so carefully by Stromer,
that were completely destroyed. In April 1944, a British bombing raid hit the museum in Munich. Gone. Along with the original Spinosaurus, Egyptosaurus. Just devastating.
It's hard to even imagine. A huge loss for paleontology. Really highlights how fragile this evidence can be.
It really does. You think about what else might have been learned from those specific bones. But Stromer's paper, thankfully, gives us a starting point.
So based on that paper, what can we say about how big Bahariasaurus actually was?
Well, it was definitely huge. The estimates put it somewhere around 11 to 12 meters long. That's what? 36 to 39 feet, and maybe weighing around 4 tons. So you're talking T-Rex size, Carcharodontosaurus size, a proper giant predator.
Okay, so a really massive animal. And Stromer's descriptions noted some specific things about the bones he had.
Yeah, some interesting details. The main bodies of the vertebrae towards the back, the posterior dorsals, were apparently longer and wider than they were tall.
Okay.
But the really unique part, potentially, was in the sacral vertebrae, the fused hip bones. Stromer described them as having this long internal air cavity, a pluricle running along their length, and a distinct groove on the underside.
And that combination is unusual.
Apparently so, yeah. Stromer noted it, and later researchers have highlighted it as potentially unique among ceratosaurs, which is a broad group Bahariasaurus has sometimes been linked to.
Interesting. What about the end of the sacrum?
The way the last sacral vertebra looked suggested that the fusion probably stopped there, didn't continue much into the tail base. Oh, and Stromer also tentatively assigned a really big femur, a thigh bone over 1.2 meters long, to Bahariasaurus. Said it was comparable in size to a T-Rex femur.
Now, I remember reading in the notes about another specimen, tentatively referred, that had skull bits.
Ah, yes. That one also had some tail vertebrae and a shoulder bone, the scapulocoracoid. But, well, later studies showed that shoulder bone was actually from a spinosaurid.
Oh, right. So not Bahariasaurus after all.
Exactly. It just goes to show how tricky it is working with fragmentary stuff from these bone beds where you've got multiple large dinosaurs mixed together. Easy to misassign things.
Definitely complicates things. And that complication extends right into trying to classify Bahariasaurus, figuring out its family relationships. That seems like a real puzzle.
Oh, it absolutely has been. A moving target, like you said. Over the years, people have suggested it might be a Carcharodontosaurid. You know, like its neighbor Carcharodontosaurid.
The shark-toothed lizards.
Right. Or maybe even linked to the Tyrannosaurids, the group that includes T-Rex. Lots of ideas floated.
But then in the 90s, Deltadromeus was discovered over in Morocco. And that shook things up.
It really did. Paul Serraner described Deltadromeus, and quite quickly, some of the material that had been tentatively linked to Bahariasaurus, including that big femur we mentioned, got reassigned to Deltadromeus.
But they kept Bahariasaurus as a separate thing initially.
Yeah, at first. But then the question immediately became, are they actually the same dinosaur?
Right. The synonymy debate.
Exactly. People started looking closer, reevaluating bones like the ischium, suggesting maybe the differences were just individual variation, or maybe the Deltadromeus fossils were from younger animals.
So it could just be one species showing variation.
That's one argument, yeah. It's a strong possibility that's been put forward.
And then there was the idea of a whole Bahariasauridae family.
Right. In 2016, Mata and colleagues proposed this group, Bahariasauridae, potentially within a larger clade called Megaraptora, known for big claws. They suggested maybe Bahariasaurus, Deltadromeus, and some South American dinosaurs like Gualecho and Aeoniraptor might belong together.
But that was more of a proposal, not fully tested.
Kind of, yeah. They didn't run a full phylogenetic analysis in that paper to formally test the grouping, but it was an interesting idea linking these finds across continents.
Okay, so where does the thinking stand more recently? I saw mention of a 2020 study.
Yeah, Ibrahim and colleagues looked at it again. They definitely acknowledged the similarities between Bahariasaurus based on Stromer's descriptions and Deltadromeus, but they felt synonymy was unlikely.
Yeah.
They pointed to perceived differences in the pelvic bones, though they didn't detail them extensively. And quite significantly, they actually designated Bahariasaurus as a nomen dubium.
Meaning a doubtful name.
Essentially, yeah. Suggesting the original material, known only from drawings now, is too incomplete or ambiguous to confidently define a distinct genus.
Wow, that's a big statement. But other recent work points somewhere else entirely. Maybe Ebolosauridae.
That's another really interesting twist. Several recent analyses looking at the combined evidence sometimes treated under the Bahariasaurus deltadromeus umbrella have actually placed it within the Ebolosauridae.
And that's a group known mostly from the southern continents, right? Like Carnotaurus.
Exactly. But Ebolosauridae is actually quite diverse. It includes the classic short-snouted ebolosaurids, but also potentially some more basal forms. And interestingly, some relatives within the wider group might have been herbivores or omnivores.
Okay, that's fascinating.
Okay.
Which brings us to the environment Bahariasaurus lived in, the Bahariya Formation. It sounds like a crowded place for giant predators.
It really does seem that way. You had Bahariasaurus, potentially Deltadromeus if it's separate. You had Tamaryraptor, which is what the Bahariya Carcharodontosaurus material is now sometimes called.
Okay.
You had the massive Spinosaurus and possibly Sigelmassasaurus, although, again, whether Sigelmassasaurus is valid or just more Spinosaurus material is debated. But still, potentially 4 huge theropods in one place.
How on earth did they all manage? You'd expect intense competition.
You would. The likely explanation is niche partitioning. They probably weren't all chasing the exact same prey in the exact same way.
So specializing.
Yeah.
Different hunting grounds, different prey sizes, maybe different hunting styles.
Precisely. Maybe Spinosaurus focused more on fish, Carcharodontosaurus Tamaryraptor on large land herbivores. And if Bahariasaurus turns out to be an abelisauroid, well, that adds another layer.
Right, because you mentioned some relatives might not have been purely carnivorous.
Exactly. If Bahariasaurus leaned towards omnivory or even incorporated some plant matter or perhaps hunted different types of smaller animals than the others, that would dramatically reduce competition with the other giants. It offers a really neat potential explanation for how this carnivore guild coexisted.
That makes a lot of sense. It wasn't just a free-for-all.
Probably not. Ecosystems, even ones with multiple giant predators, tend to find a balance through specialization.
Okay, one last point, those questionable vertebrae from Niger.
Ah, yes, the Ferrac Formation finds. De la Parent described them back in the 60s and tentatively called them Bahariasaurus, but that link is considered pretty weak.
So probably not Bahariasaurus.
Probably not. Most researchers would either suggest they might be from a Carcharodontosaurid or just label them Theropoda incertaces, basically, uncertain theropod. They don't really add much to the Bahariasaurus picture itself.
Got it. So wrapping this up, the story of Bahariasaurus is really one of, well, incredible potential and discovery, followed by this really tragic loss.
It truly is. We're left with this ghost of a giant dinosaur, piecing it together from Stromer's amazing meticulous work from over a century ago.
We know it was huge, definitely a top predator in its environment. But its exact identity, its relationship to Deltadromeus, its precise place in the theropod family tree, those are still very much active areas of scientific detective work.
Absolutely. And Strummer's legacy, despite the loss of the fossils, is immense. His work is the bedrock for understanding that whole North African late Cretaceous world. It just underscores how vital those original finds were and what a blow their destruction was.
It really does. It makes you, the listener, think about the challenges here. Working with destroyed evidence, relying on illustrations,
Yeah.
it's detective work at its most extreme.
And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other knowledge, what other lost species or insights remain hidden, either waiting for a lucky rediscovery or perhaps, like Bahariasaurus' original bones, lost to time forever?
A profound thought to end on. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.